This is Radio Romania International. You are listening to our one-hour broadcast in English for listeners in Western Europe and Japan. We can also be heard on the internet at www.rri.ro Channel 1. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and other social media platforms. Our programs are also available on TuneIn and via satellite Eutelsat 16A on 11,512 MHz vertical polarization, azimuth 16 degrees east. Symbol rate 29,950 mega symbols per second, standard DVB-S2, modulation 8 PSK, audio PID 510. We wish you good reception conditions. Hello, this is Daniel Bills with the news, the headlines. The US Congress on Thursday affirmed Democrat Joe Biden's win in the presidential election of November the 3rd. The European Commission has authorized the sale of a second anti-COVID-19 vaccine, the one developed by the US company Moderna and previously green-lighted by the European Medicines Agency. Over 76,400 people have been immunized against the COVID-19 virus in Romania so far. And Romania's Education Minister Sorin Câmpeanu has held talks with trade unions and the associations of students and teachers on the measures imposed by reopening schools. The US Congress on Thursday affirmed Democrat Joe Biden's win in the presidential election of November the 3rd. This was the last step prior to Biden's inauguration scheduled for January the 20th. The validation came after a long and troublesome day marred by an assault on the Capitol by angry Trump supporters. Trump admitted the end of his term in office and promised an orderly transition. At least 4 people died and 52 were arrested during the storming of the Capitol, police sources said. Leaders of democratic countries around the world voiced perplexity and concern condemning the violence in Washington. The European Commission on Wednesday authorized the sale of a second anti-COVID-19 vaccine, the one developed by US company Moderna and previously green-lighted by the European Medicines Agency. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said EU citizens will have another 160 million doses of vaccine available. Over 658,000 people have been infected with the novel coronavirus in Romania since the onset of the pandemic, the Strategic Communication Group announced on Thursday. The death toll stands at 16,400. 76,400 people have been immunized so far, and a third batch of 15,000 doses of vaccine arrived in Romania on Wednesday. The immunization campaign, which is first addressing medical employees, kicked off in late December, and its second stage is due to begin at the end of next week, and is addressing the vulnerable categories of people, such as the elderly, those with chronic conditions, as well as the employees of Romania's key sectors. Authorities estimate the campaign's third stage, aimed at immunizing the entire population, will kick off in April. Romania's Education Minister Sorin Câmpeanu on Thursday held talks with trade unions and students and teachers' associations to look at the measures required in order to reopen schools and to mitigate losses incurred by the education system during the health crisis. Câmpeanu pledged to consider all the proposals made so that the process of education may be carried out in good conditions starting the second semester of the year. He added that national exams will be done face-to-face. Romanian students are to resume online classes on January the 11th and could return to face-to-face classes only on February the 8th, when the second half of the academic year begins, should the situation allow it. The Social Democrats and AUR party in opposition and the Democratic Union of Ethnic Hungarians in Romania in the ruling coalition favor the reopening of schools. The National Anti-Corruption Directorate on Thursday announced that Romania's former Environment Minister Costel Alexe is being prosecuted for bribery and inciting embezzlement. The prosecutors are accusing the former minister, who is currently chairing the county council in Iași, northeastern Romania, of having received steel products worth over 20,000 euros in exchange for granting CO2 certificates to the Galați steel plant in southeastern Romania. According to prosecutors, the products had been taken out of the plant by means of fictitious sponsoring contracts. In the same file, the plant's representative has been placed under investigation also for bribery and embezzlement. Last week, Alexa said that he had never received undue benefits during his entire term in office. The President of Romania, Klaus Iohannis, held a meeting on Thursday with Prime Minister Florin Câțu, Deputy Prime Minister Dan Barna and other cabinet members, including the Ministers of Transport, Economy, Justice, Investments and European Projects, Healthcare and Research. The meeting comes amid talks on the 2021 State Budget Bill, which the government plans to submit to Parliament in early February. Prime Minister Florin Câțu asked ministers to present updated reports on the institutions they coordinate. And that was the news from Radio Romania International in Bucharest.
The European Commission has authorized the COVID-19 vaccine produced by the US company Moderna. I'm Mihaela Ignatescu with more in this report by Roxana Vasile. Just a few hours after the European Medicines Agency issued its recommendation, the European Commission on Wednesday authorized the second COVID-19 vaccine, namely the one produced by the US company Moderna. In fact, the European Commission has already ordered 160 million doses of the vaccine on behalf of the EU member countries. The vaccine is to be used for people over 18 and, just like the one produced by Pfizer-BioNTech, will be administered in 2 doses. On its website, the European Medicines Agency gives assurances that the vaccine meets all EU safety standards and promises to continue to monitor its efficacy. Moderna too says it will monitor the effects of the vaccine in the following 2 years. According to clinical trials on some 30,000 subjects aged 18 to 94, the vaccine's efficiency is 94.1%. It is based on the messenger ARN technology, just like the one made by Pfizer-BioNTech, which prepares the body to defend itself if it contracts the SARS-CoV-2 virus. After vaccination, the body produces a protein in the coronavirus and subsequently antibodies. After a short while, the protein disappears, but the body will recognize it and defend itself. While waiting for the first Moderna vaccines, Romania has been receiving those from Pfizer-BioNTech. The third tranche of 150,000 doses arrived on Wednesday. Authorities say that the immunization process is unfolding in keeping with the national strategy developed to this end, and medical staff are being immunized in the first stage. In another move, Romania has joined another 12 EU member countries and, in a joint letter to the European Commission, called for support for the Eastern Partnership and Western Balkan states, countries that are poorer or do not have a clear calendar for national vaccination campaigns. The Union will not be safe from COVID-19 until the countries its neighbors are able to recover from the pandemic too, the document reads. Romania has already sent to the neighboring Republic of Moldova the first batch of medicine and medical equipment to fight the pandemic from the support package announced by Romania's President Klaus Iohannis on the occasion of his recent visit to Chișinău. He also promised 200,000 doses of vaccine for the Republic of Moldova.
Thousands of protesters stormed the Capitol building in Washington in a desperate attempt to overturn the result of the presidential elections in November. I'm Cristina Mateescu with this report by Eugen Coroianu. Shocking images traveled around the world on Wednesday when the U.S. Capitol building was taken by storm by Donald Trump supporters. Called upon to come to Washington and encouraged by the president himself, they tried to prevent the confirmation by Congress of the result of the presidential elections, which they believe were rigged. The idea of the elections being stolen was in fact introduced to U.S. public agenda and promoted by Trump himself before, during and after elections, without being able to provide any valid proof. Dozens of court cases brought by the Republicans were all dismissed, and the Electoral College confirmed the victory of Democrat Joe Biden. Donald Trump ignored all these facts, becoming increasingly isolated even within his own party, with many Republican leaders acknowledging defeat. One such figure is Vice President Mike Pence, who was pressured by President Trump not to recognize Biden's victory. Pence told those who wrought havoc in Congress that they did not win, that violence never wins, freedom does, while the leader of Senate Republicans, Mitch McConnell, described the riots as failed insurrection. The Senate's top Democrat, Chuck Schumer, said Wednesday's events did not happen spontaneously. He accused President Trump, who he said promoted conspiracy theories and motivated these thugs, unquote, of bearing much of the blame. The attack on the Capitol was also described as insurrection by President-elect Joe Biden, who called on Donald Trump to step in firmly to stop the violence and protect the Constitution. On Wednesday, Trump posted several video messages on Twitter in which he thanked his supporters for their support, refusing to admit defeat and insisting that he won the elections and that his victory was stolen. He did tell protesters to go home so as to have peace, law and order. Leaders from around the world have condemned the events in Washington. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said politicians must impart on their supporters the need to refrain from violence and respect democratic processes. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the result of the elections won by Democrat Joe Biden must be respected. What happened in America is not American, said French President Emmanuel Macron, while British Prime Minister Boris Johnson described the scenes coming out of Washington as disgraceful. The Romanian Foreign Ministry said the violence that took place on Capitol Hill is worrying and unacceptable, and expressed confidence in American democracy, which it said should remain a model for the entire world. And that was Radio Newsreel.
Time now for Hit of the Day on Radio Romania International. The song you're about to listen to is Our World, performed by one of Romania's longest-lasting rock groups, Direcția 5.
Aici când te știu, în brațele mele, mi-e atât de dor să fiu. Singurați-o cu ochii.
You are listening to Radio Romania International. Focus on Romania. Traveler's Guide.
Hello and welcome to the first edition of 2021 of our tourism feature. I'm Călin Coțoiu, bringing you a review of some of the tourist destinations in Romania we presented to you in 2020. It was an atypical year with pandemic restrictions, in a year in which tourism operators tried to adapt in order to offer safe travel conditions. We started the year in a completely normal way, with no restrictions, and we headed to one of the most attractive historical provinces of Romania, Bukovina. We talked about its beautiful UNESCO monuments, about its painted churches, and also about skiing there. Not least, we have described its villages, true living ethnographic museums, where people still wear traditional garb, and where traditional craftsmen can be visited in their households, living exhibits that sell traditional objects. We recommended then the most developed mountain area in Romania, with resorts with ski slopes of all degrees of difficulty, from beginners to competitive skiing. This is Valea Prahovei, which has its beginnings in tourism in the 19th century, thanks to the building of Peleș Castle in Sinaia, the summer residence of the first king of Romania, Carol I. Vacation in Transylvania was the other offer early last year. We discovered then a perfect combination of cultures and traditions. Medieval fortifications and castles, famous caves and salt mines, dreamy landscapes, and of course, traditional food that is famous all over the world. The trip started in the northwest in Bihor County. We presented the tourist attractions in the city of Oradea, an old cosmopolitan city built around a fortress. Then we found out that Bihor County is the ideal destination for those who truly enjoy a multicultural display. The communities of Hungarians, Germans, Italians, and Slovaks live there in harmony, presenting to the tourists bits of history, but also traditions and customs with annual events in cities and villages. From there, we went south to the Golești Museum of Wine Growing and Fruit Growing, a place full of history where we could find an open-air ethnographic museum. From there, we took to the mountains. In Transylvania, we find the Apuseni Mountains, which are not particularly high, but have plenty of opportunities for spending free time. We started our trip right in the heart of them, in the Apuseni Nature Park, known as one of the most important as diversity and visiting experience goes. At the end of February, we described the 43rd edition of the Romanian Tourism Fair held in Bucharest. Here, the participants competed with offers for 2020 at a time when no one could have anticipated the size of restrictions imposed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Early in spring, we headed to the Domogled Valea Cernei National Park, a protected natural area in the southwest of Romania. From there, we headed to the castles in Hunedoara County in western Romania. Then came the restrictions, starting with total quarantine. Since traveling was out of the question, we all sheltered in place and took to virtual tours. We presented to you two of the most interesting museums in Romania, the Astra Transylvanian Civilization Museum and the Burkenthal Museum, both in the city of Sibiu. Then followed the tour of the top nature parks in Romania. Our trip continued with the Museum of National History and Archaeology in the city of Constanța, one of the richest museums in Romania. We talked about its impressive patrimony with over 430,000 exhibits and objects which date from the Paleolithic to the modern era. It was the first stopover in a tour de force of the most beautiful museums in the country. We continued with the National Union Museum in Alba Iulia, the Traditional Art Museum in Constanța, and the Art Museum of Romania. All these provided tourists with virtual tours on their websites. And then the quarantine was over, and traveling was once again permitted under strict distancing rules. Our attention then went to nature attractions, open-air areas where we can relax safely. Our proposals were the Mucin Mountains, the oldest in Romania, in the south. We then found out that Romania is one of the few countries in the world to have a government system of certifying ecotourism destinations in a feature dedicated to this aspect. We also presented you destinations for wildlife watching in the Carpathians and a bicycle tourism tour. In the last part of the year, we visited various ecotourism destinations, but we also had two original proposals. The first is the cultural tour of wooden churches in Romania. This has over 150 places of worship in an effort to promote the cultural heritage, especially authentic rural history. The second program, Explorer in Baragan, is the first tourism guide dedicated exclusively to this region in the southeast of Romania. This project initially identified 100 objectives with tourist potential. We concluded with recommendations to visit two major destinations in Romania, Bucharest and Cluj. In 2021, we hope that restrictions will become just a memory, and we will be able to start exploring once again the most interesting tourist destinations. Until then, you can join us in traveling to the most beautiful parts of Romania. This has been Traveler's Guide.
After customs clearance, please take your luggage and proceed to the domestic check-in area.
Coming up next, Generation 3.0.
Hello and welcome, I am Kalin Kortsoy. Today we'll talk about Ioana Dumitru, who is 34 and comes from the city of Ploiești. Right now she attends the graduate degree program in international affairs at the Romanian American University of Bucharest. For a year now she's been working in a luxury hotel in Okinawa and is the head of the League of Romanian Students Abroad. She got to Japan thanks to her activities at the Center for Romanian-Japanese Studies, where she volunteered during her college years and learned Japanese. She said she'd been dreaming since she was a little kid to go to Japan, and that is why she could not turn down the chance to work in the Japanese archipelago. The cultural shock was fairly serious, and Ioana admits that she still has difficulties adjusting.
În momentul de față mă pot să spun că m-am obișnuit 100% cu stilul de viață japonez. În Japonia, atmosfera este...
Even right now, I cannot say that I got used 100% with the Japanese lifestyle. In Japan, the atmosphere is much more strict. They have a sort of unwritten rule by which they go about their daily activities. They are not very talkative, and that was a bit challenging for me at first because I thought that was a problem even if I do speak their language. I thought they had a problem with me, but they're not talkative by nature. In Japanese culture, they have two terms, hone and tatemae, meaning what you really feel and what you show to the person in front of you. They show the tatemae and hide the hone within them, showing it only to those that they are very, very close to. This affected me first and foremost. The fact that people do not communicate as much as we Romanians do. Ioana is the head of the Japanese branch of the League of Romanian Students Abroad. She said that when she got there, it had been inactive for a few years, so she rolled up her sleeves. Together with two other members, as well as a small group of Romanian students, They reactivated the LRSA and reestablished connections with the Romanian diplomatic representative in Tokyo. The COVID pandemic, however, soon derailed their plans.
De când am reactivat filiala, ne-am dorit foarte mult să colaborăm totodată și cu ambasada României în Japonia. Ei au avut un răspuns.
Right from the start, we wanted very much to work with the Romanian embassy in Japan. They had a very pleasant response,
and right now they support us with everything we need. Unfortunately, the present context put a huge hurdle in front of us this year. In April 2020, we very much wanted to build an event around flowering cherry trees at the embassy. That was impossible because of the pandemic. The health crisis, though, could not stop the Romanian students from Japan in their tracks. The lead branch adapted and launched a series of mini projects that are supposed to make the 8,000 kilometers to their country seem less daunting. You have been listening to Generation 3.0.
Next in this program, sports.
Welcome, I'm Eugen Nasta, today with the head coach of the year in 2020. Romanian sports at world level is represented by dozens of head coaches activating in many sports disciplines, and some of them have been doing their job at top-notch level. Needless to say that football head coaches enjoy the greatest notoriety. In 2020, 4 names of football head coaches have hit the headlines. With title holders CFR Cluj, for instance, Dan Petrescu won a new edition of the domestic championship and saw his team getting through to the Europa League's group stage. Mircea Lucescu was at the helm of Dinamo Kiev, taking the team all the way up to the Champions League's group stage. In China, Cosmin Oloroi won China's Super League with Jiangsu Suning. In Saudi Arabia, with Răzvan Lucescu at the helm,